Everyone, thank you guys for taking out the time of your day. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us today and listening to our presentation. Devin and I have been working on this for the last semester, or since last semester into this semester. And our project was modeling supply and demand in the self-storage industry using data envelopment analysis.
Thank you, Kyle. So a little bit of background on our research and how we started. So fortunately, in November 2023, I was able to start interning with a real estate developer based out of Hudson County. And they have a lot of experience with self-storage operating. And so they were kind enough to give me a data set that would help us capture the market of self-storage in New Jersey. Now, we were able to present a paper with slightly different content in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but it heavily influenced this paper that we will present today. We were nominated for Best Undergraduate Research, and of course we were able to do this under the supervision of Dr. Lee and the NGCU Supply Chain and Demand Analytics Lab.
So to give a little more perspective on the industry itself, I'd like to draw your attention to this visual here on the left. And what it's displaying is that comparative to all the other classes of real estate investment types, such as retail, apartment, industrial, office, real estate, the self-storage industry has significantly outperformed all the other classes within the past 30 years. When you pair that with this visual here on the right, what this is telling you is that the number of households that are actively using self-storage across the United States has actually increased within the past 15 years. And then on the bottom, you'll see a light description of the data that we use. So towards the left, we had a data set, as Devin mentioned, from the self-storage company with 821 facilities, which depicted its address, the net rentable square footage, as well as the development status in which it was built. In addition, we amplified this data set by including 28 attributes based off of each individual county on demographic data. So some of this demographic data categories included population overviews, economic profiles, housing and household characteristics, as well as additional demographics. And this is just a small snapshot so you can see what that looked like.
So what exactly is the problem here in the self-storage industry? Well, we really haven't been able to come to a consensus, and there's been a lot of discussion regarding how we measure supply and demand. Now, demand is much more straightforward. However, there's different ways to measure that. Most common would be 4Ds, which is death, divorce, downsizing, and displacement. That's usually when consumers will go ahead and use self-storage or rent a unit. The next would be lifestyle, commercial, and transitional demand. But there are other demographic factors that may influence that, such as who is your customer. Historically, it's been your middle-aged females, sort of like the mother of a household. They're usually the purchaser of self-storage. And so we really just wanted to explore exactly what causes demand in the self-storage industry, who is that customer that we want to target, and has that changed over time. When we go ahead and measure supply, this is where it gets very tricky. So historically in self-storage, we've always measured supply using NRSF per capita, which is net rentable square footage per capita. However, there's been sort of this argument in regards to using NRSF per capita versus market penetration. So what market penetration captures is the units available to each consumer in each city. And so I'll explain it a little, we'll go into later, and we'll go into detail in terms of what the difference is between the two and how we've addressed this problem. But ultimately, the reason why market penetration hasn't gained traction is because there isn't much data available at scale. And so usually the developers have to make assumptions in regards to their development sites and how many units they think that consumers need and which unit size that might be.
So when we began our project, we had three main objectives. They were to determine social economic impact analysis, as well as dynamic market trends between pre and post-COVID using the facilities and the development dates. But our main goal in this presentation was to focus on demand forecasting and the market analysis. So specifically, we're trying to identify where the supply is, or the oversupply or undersupply specifically in each county. And the question is how do county demographics interplay with the demand and supply in each individual county?
You know, before we move forward, I just want to highlight that we really try to focus on structural demand. A lot of the demand in self-storage comes from housing activity, and so again, we mentioned transitional downsizing, displacement. When people are moving from house to house is when they typically use self-storage. And so by focusing on structural demand, we don't have any anything influencing, or any economic cycles that influence the demand. So we're able to really isolate what those structural factors are. Now, data envelopment analysis is a non-parametric method that is used to measure the productivity or efficiency of what's called decision-making units. In our case, this will be counties, and we'll explain that further later. There are several ways to implement this model. There's input orientation, output orientation. In our case, we're using an output-oriented model, which means that we're looking to increase the output. In our case, output would be the supply in each county. This is a very popular model that is used when you're working with industries that do not have readily available data or do not measure performance using financial data. And so oftentimes in real estate, and specifically in self-storage, there is not so much data available, and you oftentimes are going off speculation and your knowledge within a specific area. And so we really wanted to utilize this to try and measure self-storage at scale, across New Jersey.
What that means is we have to look at our demand metrics, and our demand metrics are going to be our inputs. So if we start from the top, our first demand metric that we used was households. This is going to offer a baseline for the amount of demand based off of how many houses are in a particular county. Next, we focus on the total employer establishments per capita. So by capturing commercial demand from businesses existing within a particular county, that might be an influence in gauging how much demand there is for self-storage. The next demand metric we used was persons per household. So this typically demonstrates whether or not there's more houses or more apartment style buildings, depending on how many people there are in one household. And then total retail sales per capita basically suggests the consumer spending patterns and identifies urban hubs. So typically these urban hubs have more demand for self-storage. And then last but not least, you'll see land area with 2 asterisks next to it. This we included as a proxy to try to convert this data into density. So by using the land area, we were trying to determine how dense the specific county was.
Now, that land area had an asterisk because we were debating whether or not it was important to use. And one of the discussions that arose while we were conducting this research was that density actually does not impact self-storage as much as we would think. Because what happens is that customers, as they move towards urban areas, tend to prefer smaller unit sizes. And so when you use net rentable square footage per capita, it doesn't accurately capture that the unit sizes are shrinking when you're in more urban areas. So a great example, this is actually a slide that was presented at the New York Self-Storage Association conference earlier in March. And Alex Burnham from Manhattan Mini Storage basically gave a very good example as to why square foot per capita is not a good way to measure supply, and why we need to add additional factors. So as you can see over here on this right-hand side, Manhattan has a square foot per capita of 3.24, which is relatively small. On average, we say that we want a SF per capita anywhere between 7 to 9 in self-storage, and that's what we consider equilibrium historically. In Boise, we see that the square foot per capita is 18, so it's way above equilibrium. Now, when you go ahead and compare the total units and the average unit size, as you can see, in Manhattan it's much smaller than in Boise, Idaho. Again, this is what we said, that this is the reason why SF per capita is not a good measure of supply, because the unit size is very, very correlated with the urban density of a city or a location. So we prefer to use units per capita. As you can see, it's much closer, which shows that it's much closer to equilibrium. However, the problem is that self-storage facilities don't like to share how many units or the average size of each unit publicly, for competitive advantages and whatnot. And so we have to come up with an alternative approach to address this. And we'll share the two variables that are used for supply.
And so these are the metrics that we use for supply, and these are the outputs that we are trying to maximize with our inputs. The first one is going to be our NRSF per capita. So this provides insight into the capacity of storage space available to the population. So what this does, it provides a gauge of how well supply meets demand in terms of volume, essentially meaning, is there enough net rentable square footage per person in this county? And then we use the number of facilities per capita. So this measures the availability of self-storage options within a particular area. So some areas typically have more numbers of self-storage, like in Jersey City, Bayonne, Hudson County particularly has a lot of self-storage, whereas Bergen County might be a little bit less.
So we'll quickly run through this, but what's important is that the methodology obviously began at the exploratory data analysis level, and this is what really sparked our curiosity. It's pretty apparent that NRSF per capita in this heat map is not reflected, does not accurately reflect the population density, as you can see in this chart. So the red is very much concentrated in Hudson County, which is where we are, which makes a lot of sense. However, NRSF per capita is not concentrated in Hudson County. So that begged a lot of questions. Are we not meeting demand in Hudson County? Is there not enough demand in Hudson County? Why is that the case? And as we just explained, because there's smaller unit sizes, NRSF will not actually paint the picture of supply. So we need to have an alternative measure. Another thing that's important, just to give you context of the self-storage industry in New Jersey, the 5 largest REITs control about slightly over 50% of the market. But what's important is to know that there's 249 operators, and so they're heavily dominated by the 5 largest real estate investment trusts. And so there's a lot of competition in this market, and it's very important to also address which type of facility is operating in which county. Additionally, we use a regression model initially to identify these variables. We are then able to confirm them with literature as well as experts in the industry. This is the model on the right-hand side of what data envelopment analysis looks like. So I'll keep this brief, but our goal here is to maximize our outputs, which is we want to make sure that supply accurately meets demand.
And to provide a model overview and the best use case for what we are trying to present here is that this model is particularly useful for urban planning and land use policy development. In other words, because this is developing a structural demand, we are looking to say, hey, listen, these are areas that are either undersupplied or oversupplied, and policymakers can go in and determine whether or not to develop further or to continue to develop more self-storage facilities. And some existing limitations between this is that, as Devin said before, because this is a structural demand, we aren't capturing any cyclical demand. We aren't capturing any of the quality and services as well as customer behavior and any technological advancements that one particular self-storage facility might be taking over the other. Another misconception that we want to avoid is that because one county is efficient doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be profitable. In other words, it's ignoring local nuances and statistic analysis. Because we don't have some of the financial data as well as the occupancy rates, we're very limited in terms of saying that this is an efficient county as well as a profitable county. So although it is efficient, it is likelihood, or there is a chance for it not being profitable. Again, this is our input and output mix that we use for our DEA.
We didn't actually use land area, by the way. We just want to present that there so you guys are reminded as to why we didn't.
And then just to point out of how the efficiency scores should be interpreted. So the scores are going to be relative. We're comparing each county to another county within the state of New Jersey. And scores that are efficient are going to come up as 1 versus anything over 1 is going to be undersupplied, and anything under 1 is going to be oversupplied.
So right here we have the variable retention scale model and the constant retention scale model. Now we'll interpret these scores, but first I just want to mention that we're going to focus on Bergen County for this sake, and this is actually particularly interesting because Bergen County right now is seeing a lot of interest from self-storage developers, and so I think it's specifically particularly relevant for us to explore. Now, this heat map almost paints a better picture of the market, and the dark reds being the areas that need to have less supply. So, maybe we may stop providing tax breaks. Maybe we just want to discourage supply in those areas. Sorry, the light is where we want to discourage supply. The red is where we want more supply. And so now let's drill down on Bergen County and what this really means in terms of our data. So Bergen County, as you can see right here, had a score of 1.84 in the variable returns, 1.86 in the variable returns to scale model, 1.92 in the constant returns to scale model. So the difference between these two scores is what we consider scale inefficiencies, meaning that Bergen County is not operating at the optimal scale. This doesn't really make sense because a county can't just decide that they want to grow. They can't just change the size of their county. And so what we attribute this to is inaccurate or non-optimal placement of the storage facilities in each county. And so this kind of almost gives us a measure of the performance. However, it's not the most accurate. Again, we didn't include financial data, we didn't use occupancy rates, but this is it gives us an idea of what these counties and what these self-storage facilities in these counties are performing like. Now, variable returns to scale is just operating efficiency. And so what operating efficiency represents is just the overall supply. It doesn't have anything to do with performance. So by analyzing some of the data that we had and by measuring the slacks and data envelopment analysis, we're able to pretty much target exactly what we want to do with Bergen County. And so I'll keep this short. I'm not going to talk about the numbers, but we want to develop 34 facilities with 2,300 net rentable square footage. And so this is important because this gives us the optimal size for the facility in the county, and it gives us the number of facilities. And so we're able to have an idea of if I was to, we can't obviously develop 34 at once. If I want to develop one, I know that it has to be around 60,000 net rentable square feet.
And to wrap up our project, I just want to come to some conclusions that we were able to make at the end of this project. So our study impact, we were able to validate the model use within this current context of the project, focusing on local regulation and particularly the case use for land use policymaking. We developed a strategic roadmap where we're able to develop a strategic roadmap, as Devin just mentioned. For Bergen County, we can pinpoint the number of facilities and as well as the number of square footage that is required. We're able to identify DEA using the operational versus scale impact. So we're able to see on an operational level where they're operating well, and scaling wise where they're competitive amongst the other counties. And then for future studies, we'd also like to include other demand drivers, include some time series data, as well as financial data, and potentially incorporating geospatial analysis. Our last conclusion and from our main objectives that we had on this screen before, we're really able to understand the dynamic market trends between pre and post-COVID, specifically identifying an alternative approach to ensuring measuring supply and demand in the market is consistent across all counties within the state of New Jersey. These are our references, and we'd just like to thank you for taking the time out again today and listening to our presentation.
I thought with storage facilities, typically it's land that's developed that's not suitable for other types, like either commercial or rental because of maybe environmental reasons or whatever. Does that play a factor in whether or not municipalities are willing to agree to put a storage facility on a particular plot of land?
That is a common factor, a common deterrent that we face when we're developing self-storage. I still intern with this company, so I do get a lot of real world examples of this. So yeah, zoning typically is very limited for self-storage. And so the reason why this model is particularly useful for land use is because we can encourage them to change the zoning or sort of approve certain land uses according to what we believe is undersupply or oversupply. So we actually had a meeting with the Bayonne mayor not too long ago, and we were able to show him this and pretty much say, this is the case why we may not want more facilities here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And the other questions do the profitability or those to the report?
So, to my knowledge, so it's very difficult because they don't like to share their models.
Right.
And so we actually just went through a long project to break down their lease up models and exactly how they plan on developing. But in short, the issue is that because there's a lot of players that are small businesses, this is actually more impactful for them because they're not as sophisticated in their modeling. And a lot of times with small businesses, they're very familiar with the local area. And so they don't necessarily need too much data to drive their decisions. But this is a way to confirm the decisions and, further drive those, further reinforce those ideas.
Thank you.
Have a lot to do with the way things fall out, because you can imagine that in urban areas where you can't drive up to the storage facility and unload all your junk, that would be a problem.
Yeah.
Whereas, in the suburban areas, it's
Right.
beautiful.
Interesting if we were able to do a geospatial analysis, similar to what your presentation was, just because we know, well, at least historically, and at least my manager knows, that it's better to place self-storage next to shopping centers, next to grocery stores, because that's where people visit more frequently. If we had a geospatial analysis, that'd be interesting to look at. Now, in terms of the urban areas, so yes, because in general, these people tend to walk more, they tend to use public transportation more, they aren't really storing as much items in general. And so you're right, they tend to not want to store as much, and so that's why the unit sizes tend to come down.
Like the customer driving the truck or
I'm pretty sure they have the truck there, so it's probably used for the customer to get in and out.
Okay, so the customer can do it.
Yeah, it's kind of like the luxury condo have gym and all that stuff. Right?
Yeah.
And that's another thing I've noticed, right? Post-COVID, you mentioned Bergen County, so I was driving down 17 one day and I saw a building pop up. I was wondering what that was going to be, right? So I drove it a few more times. It was a storage unit. And one of the things I noticed during post-COVID is a lot of these luxury condos that build up, like 20 units, 250 units, luxury condos, they always have a storage unit nearby. So I was wondering if the owners of those, the REITs or whatever, owner of those units have anything to do with the storage units as far as like getting the location, permits and all that.
Oh, definitely. As a storage developer, when I know that there's a multi-family
development,
development,
yeah.
I go straight to them and say, you guys need storage.
Yeah.
And then we go and bring that to the land use attorney or whoever, and it helps us build our case.
Yeah.
Second, I'm more in the IT side and technology innovation. Did you see actually, because this is based on data mainly, did you see actually opportunities regarding using new technologies in this area, which seems to be very material focus?
So you're asking in terms of the self-storage facilities, or have we witnessed any technological advancements? Or have we seen? So as Devin mentioned, self-storage are typically looking to reduce their operating costs, so they're leaning towards more technologies that can allow the customer to come in and be self-sufficient, book the type of self-storage space that they want, whether it's a 10 by 10 or 5 by 4. There's obviously different sizes, but they're trying to make or bring in technology to almost reduce the human interaction between people. A lot of times another experience or another common trait amongst people who rent self-storage is that they want to get in and out type of thing, so less interaction that I have to make with someone, small talk, although there are small things like that, they're looking at as posing advantages. You just come in, get what you have to do, and there's minimal interaction. You don't have to deal with anyone, you can do what you have to do.
On the data side, there isn't actually much, again, self-storage companies, because it's a relatively young industry, they don't actually like to share data. In multifamily, they share all their occupancy rates, they share exactly at which rate that they're renting out the units. They don't do that in self-storage. So you have to use your industry experience a lot of times. So it'd be nice if they had more readily available data.
And so did you see, I'm guessing based on what you're presenting, there are business opportunities and it seems interesting and growing. So are you considering continuing working in this type of industry after graduation?
enjoy commercial real estate in general. I don't know about self-storage specifically, and he actually sent me an article yesterday that came up.
It's projected to go down 2024. A lot of interest in self-storage, so it's not doing too hot.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I want to stay in self-storage.